Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
All right, greetings everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Daniel Lowry, and in today's episode, well, we are continuing in our A+ series. Yes, it is that long. There's a lot of information for us to cover, and they do that intentionally because they want you to have a very broad scope of knowledge when it comes to being an A+ technician. And guess what? We've got someone here that's helping lead that charge so that we can have that knowledge imparted into our brains. And it is our good friend, Mr. Wes Bryan. Wes, we are so glad to have you again. How's it going, sir?
Man, it's going great. I think it's an Aerosmith song I can think of going on in the back of my head. Train keep rolling all night long.
Yeah, it
That's
does.
right. Well, it is rolling for sure. And that's right. We are continuing on in mobile devices. And there is a laundry list of the things that could potentially come up when it comes to your different mobile devices. And really, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't matter if we're talking laptops, if we're talking tablets, phablets, e-readers, you know, all different types, cell phones, smartphones, if you will. We kind of just rolling them all into one big pile here when we talk about mobile devices. Keep in mind some of the other things that we talked about in the first part. Really the main thing that I'd like to recap is that some devices are field serviceable, or components within these devices, I say, are field serviceable. Some are not. Some things you just can't replace, and keep in mind that some things you can't upgrade either, right? For instance, NAND flash memory is typically built into the motherboards or the PCBs, the printed circuit boards that are in these devices. When you talk about system on a chip, where everything's built into the circuit board itself, we can't replace them, right? If it's external storage and you have a space, if you will, for things like your micro SD cards, well then you could probably expand storage. So again, some things you can replace, some things you can upgrade, other things are not field serviceable, which means if they become damaged, you have to replace the device outright. All right, so that being said, let's go ahead and continue on in our list here. We left off and we were talking a little bit about some of the networking communications. We talked about troubleshooting really wireless. However, when we were talking about wireless, really what we were talking about was the Wi-Fi side of things. What we didn't talk about are some of the things that you can see when it comes to Bluetooth, and I want to mention just briefly cellular communications as well. All right, when it comes to Bluetooth, remember Bluetooth is a very short range, very easy to configure wireless connection. Operates in the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum of the Industrial, Scientific, and Medical Band, ISM. Most of your devices today, mobile devices, will support some Bluetooth capabilities. However, as the Bluetooth has gone on, it's become less power hungry than it was in the earlier days. In fact, if we were teaching this 5 years ago, I would have told you, or even prior to that, I would have been telling you, well, if you're not using Bluetooth, you really should be turning it off because of the fact that it'll drain your battery considerably faster with it turned on. Now, there could still be something to that in the fact that any unused connection does have a potential for a security vulnerability that somebody could try to piggyback off of, right? But we'll talk about security in other episodes. But I do want you to remember that if you're not using Bluetooth, well, go ahead and turn it off. You could save and extend your battery life, which is one of those major concerns when it comes to portability and mobility of these devices.
All right, Wes, so obviously Bluetooth is a major player here as something that we're going to run into as an A+ technician. What are some of the common connectivity issues we might encounter?
You know, one of the first things I think of is just, fat finger in the keyboard and some of those quick settings that you get to where you turn it off, right? And if the adapter's turned off, well, you aren't going to have any Bluetooth. The other thing that you can also keep in mind, too, is that some devices require, when you turn Bluetooth on, it has to go into a pairing mode, right? Now, most of the devices, when you connect for the first time, you have to pair it up with whatever the other device is that is going to communicate over a Bluetooth connection, right? However, a lot of times that it'll remember that, right? It'll keep it in memory that, hey, I've already paired up with this device. So there's a couple of things that you might have to keep in mind that if you have no Bluetooth connectivity, have you ever gone through the pairing process before? All right, and when we say going through the pairing process, has that device entered into that little trust relationship with the other device? And if it has, do you have to put in a security pin, right? The pin is something that you have to keep in mind as well. Some devices require you to put a little 4-digit code. Sometimes they're just one of these things that is just a default of like 4 zeros, right? So pay attention to the manufacturer. I have seen where you have to put in some kind of pin in order to complete the pairing process. And if there's a lack of a pin entry or a pin mismatch, that'll cause the communication not to happen. The other thing is airplane mode. Keep in mind when you turn on airplane mode, it turns off wireless, wireless adapters, and that includes Bluetooth. So if you have Bluetooth enabled, you know that you've communicated with a device before, but you still have you don't have any Bluetooth connection. Have you accidentally pressed the airplane mode? And it's disabled those different wireless communications. All right, so that is some of the things when we talk about different wireless communications as well. They don't call it out here on the exam objectives, but I just want to briefly mention this too with the cellular communications likewise too. That's a setting, right? So cellular communications, obviously you can use the phone, but maybe you can't use the data plan, right? Granted, you have to have a data plan, and if you do, most of them have data plans today. You just have to make sure that you have the data setting turned on. So if you can't browse to like the internet, and you expect that you should, you're trying to download an application, you're trying to do an update, and that's not happening, check to make sure wireless adapters turned on if you're doing this over Wi-Fi, and if you're trying to do this on the road over the cellular communication, if you're well away from your wireless network, do make sure that you have that data setting turned on so that you get cellular communication. The other thing to keep in mind too is when you're roaming. All right, you have to make sure that you're roaming within an area that your provider has given you those roaming capabilities, right? Because it's not necessarily the fact that because you can't connect over the cellular network that there's a lack of a cellular network. It might just be that maybe you don't have the technologies. Primarily today we're seeing some of the 3G technologies, and even the 4G technology, LTE, is very, very common to find out there as you're traveling. So a couple of things that you do have to keep in mind when it comes to your wireless type communications, whether it be Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or your cellular. All right, so some of the other things they talk about: cannot display to an external monitor. This could be something a lot of times that if we're talking about a wired connection, in some of the older laptops you'd have a little toggle switch that you'd have to press, and if you didn't press it you couldn't extend or send the signal over the external wired connection to whatever that monitor is. However, keep in mind, not so much so today in some of the newer graphics adapters, but you might have an older graphics adapter and its lack of, the graphics adapter doesn't support external monitors. That's a rarity today, because most of even your like basic processors today do support that, or graphics adapters. And the reason I say that your basic processors, I want you to know, because we talk about this in the mobile devices, when we talk about the CPUs, they're also called APUs. Like AMD has this clever marketing thing where they call it an accelerated processing unit versus a CPU. It's still a CPU, but what it does is it integrates the graphics capability right into the die of the chip. Don't think that that's something that's lacked on the Intel side too. Intel's been doing this, and the A-series processors that Apple has, and Snapdragon for that matter, where the graphics processing unit is built right into the CPU. It's literally in the die of the chip. So it's not a commonality that you wouldn't be able to extend it to an external monitor. OS configuration errors, this could be the problem too if it's a laptop, right? For instance, if you're inside of Windows, you might have to go to the screen resolution settings, and I say screen resolution settings because that's in the operating system. You'll see when we get into our 902 series where we have to detect and identify the external monitor. That could be something. Now, the other thing is that I've been talking about a wired connection, all right? You also have a wireless connection, too, that allows us to extend whatever we're seeing on our device to an external monitor via something known as Wi-Fi Direct. All right, the other thing that you have, too, is air sharing. Mac allows you to do air sharing, which is basically like their Wi-Fi Direct type communication, where I can take what I'm seeing on my display and I can extend it out to a wireless device over the wireless network. There are a couple of things that have to be in play for this to, this functionality to work. First of all, the device that you are looking at the screen that you want to extend it to, or you extend it from, that device. If it's my mobile device and I want to do Wi-Fi Direct, understand that my device has to support Wi-Fi Direct. A lot of the smart TVs that you use today support Wi-Fi Direct as well, so you have to make sure that that is turned on, and there's a pairing process a lot of times that this has to happen too, where you put a code that says, hey, do you want to allow the communications for security purposes, enter this pin. That has to happen. So both ends of the communication has to happen. Well, how about the middleman? Middle person, middle woman, if you will, for analogy purposes. The access point has to support it now too. And if it has the Wi-Fi logo on it, that means it is a Wi-Fi Alliance endorsed access point, right? That's why it's good to look for the Wi-Fi logo that's stamped somewhere on the box, because in order to be Wi-Fi Alliance endorsed, to have that Wi-Fi signal, it has to support Wi-Fi Direct. But it might be something that you have to turn on. Air sharing inside of your Macs allows you to do the same functionality too. You have to make sure that if you go into the Mac, whether it's a MacBook, whether it's an iPhone, or an iPad, that you have air sharing turned on as well. And the same thing would go with NFC type connections, your near-field communications like AirDrop in your iOS devices, and Wi-Fi Direct as well inside of your Android-based devices too. All right. If you can't display to an external monitor, wire connection could be damaged, a wired cable, right? It could be a cable mismatch, right? That might cause problems too. Could be an external monitor issue. Whatever the external display is that you're sending it to, does it have issues? Again, that could be the problem too. All right, screen not responsive, non-responsive. They put it more technically here in the objectives. We've kind of mentioned some of these. You know, if you have a protective case across the outside and there's a little bit of water or debris in between whatever the protective coating is and the actual touch screen, this could be restricting your ability to be able to communicate, or interact with the touch screen. Could be damaged if it's a capacitive touch. Again, a capacitive touch. Right? It could be the capacitors have failed, right? If it's a resistive touch, the resistive layer could be damaged as well, and you're not getting a communication there. Some of the things that you can do, sometimes it's just rebooting the device. There's been times where I've tried to interact with the touchscreen, I'm like, this thing isn't working, or it's being very jittery, right? You press a button and then you wait a few seconds, and then finally you see a few things open up. Just reboot the device. That can help a lot of times too. You can always clean the screen with a lint-free cloth, and some devices, even like your ebook readers, have recalibration software in them. A lot of times the devices do this themselves today. We don't have to interact with it like we have in some of the earlier touch screens where you would have to do a recalibration, especially in the earlier tablet PCs. You would have to do this. A lot of times it's going to be a self-calibration that happens, and you don't have to do this for your own. All right, so here are some other things that we have to worry about too. How about apps not loading? All right, well, there's quite a few things that, would cause an app not to load. Very first thing, that the app is not even on the device. It isn't on the device to begin with, right? So, if you've uninstalled an app, there have been times where I've seen icons left behind and that app was uninstalled. All right, it's, again, becoming less and less common. They're getting really, really good with the operating systems. We used to have this a lot in Windows, where you'd remove an application and have some generic icon that you'd hover over it and it would say the application, but it was just remembered in the registry, right? Today, the registries and the configuration files, they do a pretty good job of cleaning themselves up. And that's one of the reasons, even though this isn't a security-related, isn't a security-centric episode, I want you to remember that it is good to download from trusted installation sources, whether it's Google Play, Amazon App Store, whether it's the App Store for iTunes, or not iTunes, but in the Apple world. And that's because they go through some checks and balances to make sure that when you uninstall an application, it does remove itself completely from the device, unlike some other potential unknown applications or unknown sources that might not play nice, and when that happens, they don't actually completely uninstall themselves, let alone what else they might be doing. You could have files that are actually missing or corrupted in an application, and that could cause it not to load. Here's another thing that I've seen. If you try to offload some, to relieve some of the internal storage for the device, and you offload the application, it gives you the ability to move it over to external storage, right? And you upgrade the storage card. Well, what happens? Well, on that old card, you still have some of the files that contain that the application needs to run. And when that's not present, guess what? Unfortunately, the application's not going to load. Malware. I don't like throwing malware out there at the front, because if somebody assumes that if an application's not working or it's causing problems, it's got to be malware. Not necessarily, right? The more likelihood is that it's user error before it's malware. However, you can never say never and never overlook it. Some of the things you can do: restart the application. Force kill it, restart it, see if it'll load, right? Could be a memory issue, could be memory hang. Uninstall the application if it still exists and reinstall it. That might be a good simple fix. Run anti-malware software, and I think I've already mentioned this a few times now, reboot the devices. Remember all your technical skills, and sometimes it only takes a reboot to fix the problem. I know, sad, but yet true at the same time. Slow performance. All right, when we talk about slow performance, there are a lot of things that can cause slow performance. Do you have too many applications running on a device at a single time? All right, most of these devices actually work in what's known as a passive active mode with their applications. Not every device that you have is a true multi-application running device. Let me tell you what I mean here, all right? When you have an application that's loaded into memory, right, and your memory starts to get full in laptops that are running normal operating, full-blown operating systems, and I haven't dug down into some of the Android and the iOS devices, but I can only imagine they're doing this as well. They work on what's known as a swap file. All right, in Windows we call it a page file. You're basically taking a portion of the storage device in there and you're using it like it is physical RAM, random access memory, right? Well, when you're in, let's say you're in Windows, right? You have two applications open on your desktop. Guess what? The one that's in focus is actually running at that current time. You could have background processes that are running, but not every application is actually running, but it will lock down the memory, right? Because you don't want to corrupt the information. So if you have multiple applications open, keep in mind that the one that's in focus might be running at the time, but the ones that are in the background are still consuming some of your portions of your random access memory in the device. So what do you need to do? Close some of the applications down, right? Force kill them, right? There's usually settings on, especially in Android and iOS, that you can, on iOS, I believe you hold in like the home button, right? And it separates all the applications that are running and you just swipe them off the screen and shut them down, right? I know in my Android device, I've got a button next to the home button, if you will, that I can hold in and it shows me all the applications that are running and I can just sit there and swipe them to the side and clear them. Sometimes you can scroll all the way down and you got a clear all button, right? And it'll shut every one of them down. That could be a problem. You could have a low battery, right? Remember, mobile devices are all about saving battery life or preserving the consumption of that battery power, right? So when you start to get a low battery, what happens is your CPUs go through what's known as a throttling process, right? Throttling process is a stepping down of the voltage or stepping up of the voltage, right? Intel's had this for a very long time. AMD's got theirs. Intel's called speed step, right? So if it's an Intel-based device, it's called speed step. It's been around for a very long time, going all the way back to the very early Pentium processors. AMD's got theirs. It's called Power Now. Qualcomm has got theirs, and Snapdragon. Everybody does it, right? It's basically, Intel called it for a while multi-voltage positioning, right? A fancy way of saying, hey, if you don't need the processing power, let's save your battery life and we'll step down the voltages. When you're losing battery, your devices a lot of times are configured to do everything they can to conserve the battery life, and that could be causing slow performance as well. Now, if you don't have a low battery life or low battery at that point, what you might have is just power saving settings turned on, right? If you have those initiated, even if you have a full battery, it's going to manually throttle it. You've done that, so you have to check the settings, right? Storage is full. If the storage on the device becomes full and you're using the external SD card in order to install your applications or save your applications or to save consumption of the internal storage, guess what? Performance becomes slow. I'm going to skip over this one. I'll save it for last here, but shut down some applications, charge your battery, turn off the battery saving settings, if you will. Last but not least, again, it could be malware. I mean, I don't like putting malware first in everything because we always want to go there. Make sure that there are other things involved. I'd hate to see you sit there and run a malware scan for an hour and a half on a big, a lot of devices there and only to find out that guess what? You've got the power saving button turned on and that's why you have slow performance. So use malware as a last option, right? Always run it if you can, schedule scans by all means. I'm not saying don't be safe, but definitely be smart about it because those malware scans could take a good long while only to learn that it was just the fact that you pressed a button on the home screen that put it in a power saving mode. Next one. Now, I don't know that maybe too many home users might have this problem, but you can definitely see it in businesses, right? They say unable to decrypt email, right? In a home environment, you might not have this as much unless you're doing full device encryption, and it doesn't matter if you're in business or if you're in home, then that might be the fact that, well, it isn't your device, right? That a lot of times comes down to an ownership thing. However, in business environments, when you're talking about can't decrypt your email, a lot of times you talk about certificate problems, and we don't really want to get into a public key infrastructure, certificates in this. But just understand you got a little digital security file, if you will, that allows only you to encrypt the information and decrypt it, right? To scramble it so that if I scramble it, Dan couldn't grab a hold of that email and he couldn't read it, right? Because I'd also have that same little digital security file that would allow me to decrypt it, unscramble it so that I can read it. Now here's the problem. If I send that email to Dan and Dan doesn't have access to that little security mechanism, he's not going to be able to read it, right? We do this when we use things like SMIME out there, and as you guys go on, you'll learn that secure multimedia internet mail extensions, right? It's a way that I can make sure that if I send Dan an encrypted email that only I want him to be able to see, well, I already reached out and talked to him beforehand through the application, and it gave me that little security file so that I can encrypt it and send it to him. The problem is, too, if it's ownership, if it's something that only I should see, he wouldn't be able to read it. So again, those are some problems. Like I said, I don't want to get too much into a security thing here, but that could be a file corruption on that little security file that we talk about known as a certificate. Extremely short battery life. All right, well, when it comes to extremely short battery life, could be performance settings, and this is the other side of the tracks, right? The fact that you have you end up having a high performance set up, right? You got all of your wireless connections turned on and you're just draining your battery life, right? Too many applications are open. Your battery's failing, right? Some of the things we've already talked about with power, right? Chargers failed. The cable's damaged itself, the charging cable. The charging cable, again, is it's a data cable, right? It isn't a charging cable. That can be something. AC power source. All of these things related to the battery's lack of the ability to charge or just low battery in general. Reconfigure your performance settings, close some applications, check the battery, run a diagnostic. They have applications that can run battery health checks, right? And you might need to replace the battery. You might need to replace the charger or the cable associated with it. Check the AC source. A lot of times when you talk about a rapidly depleting battery, it could be a battery problem in itself, it could be a configuration setting, or it could just be that you are running too many things at one time. Overheating. Overheating is a big thing. Remember proper thermal management, right? That is something that we also want to keep in mind, right? Dust and debris gets in the vents. A lot of times these vents that we have aren't that big, right? Do you have your phone? If it's a phone or a tablet, I know this has happened to me when I'm traveling and I didn't realize that I had my tablet sitting in the passenger seat there and the sun's coming in the window. And I will tell you that I've seen iPads do this where they will literally go into a thermal shutdown and they will put a big triangle and exclamation point that says thermal shutdown in progress. I thought it was amazing because I was traveling for 4 hours, and again, I had it in the passenger seat, and the sun was coming in the whole entire time, and it was cooking the mobile device.
Yeah,
right?
my phone actually did the exact same thing. We went to Disney, and I left it in the car, and it was like 97 degrees.
And it's
when
scary,
I came back,
right?
And I looked at the phone, and it was like, you have a thermal problem, and this device is being shut down. I was
Yeah.
like, yes, you do that.
Yeah, it scared the heck out of me because I was using it at the time for a TomTom, right? So
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I better do something or I'm not going to know where I'm at. So yeah, so keep in mind it could be direct sun like that. And we could say environmental issues, right? And I don't mean, like I said, global warming or anything. It's just the fact that whatever environment you have it in is basically causing it to overheat. Again, many applications open, this happens. The other thing too, I've seen people where they turn over and they don't realize that they're maybe sitting on their phone and your body heat is actually causing that thing to not be able to dissipate heat and your body heat. So just kind of pay attention to that problem there. Some of these devices and a lot of these devices use passive heating, which means they don't have any fans. All right, so they have thought about it enough to where they place maybe heat sinks or strategically placing the components within them so that they can cool themselves, but any kind of debris gets in there and it can cripple that type of cooling system. If it happens to be active cooling, which is using some sort of fan and vent, make sure that the fans are still working and make sure that the vents are free of any debris or blockage. Frozen system. All right, when it comes to frozen system, it could be memory issues, could be an application hang. All right, this one could be malware as well. Some of the things that you can do is force kill any application that might be locking your system up. If that doesn't work, then what you do is you do a reboot. And there's two types of reboots that I want you to be aware of. There's a hard reboot and a soft reboot. All right, a soft reboot is where you press the power button, you hold it in, and it gives you a screen that says, do you want to reboot, restart the device, or do you want to shut it down? That's a soft reboot. Sometimes the system gets so frozen that that screen doesn't come up. then typically what you do is you press, like for instance, the home button or the power button and like a volume knob, right? And you hold it in, and it will literally be no different than you taking a workstation and pressing in the power button and holding it until it does a hard reboot, right? So soft reboot versus a hard reboot. You might have to do one or the other. Some of the other things they talk about: no sound from the speakers. All right? It's going to sound, I'm not talking down to anybody. You guys are smart out there. You guys can do this. Are the sound settings misconfigured? Do you have a mute button turned on? Right? Do you have it in vibrate mode rather than your volume turned up? Can happen very easy. Right? I know on my phone and some of the Android phones, if you press the down button or the down volume button long enough, it instantly mutes the phone. Right? So it could be some a setting like that. Could be the fact that the speakers have failed. It also could be an application setting if it happens to be an application that is specific to some kind of sound happening as well. Right? You could get some conflict where maybe you got one application that is using your sound, but it's frozen, and you're launching another application, and it can't take back over. So you can also reboot the device there as well. GPS not functioning. Well, this could be the fact that a couple of things, right? You could have location settings could be turned off, right? If you have location settings turned off, then essentially you are disabling the GPS receiver, if you will, in your system. Could be the fact that you're in an area that isn't triangulated very well. That's not. That's kind of unlikely. Doesn't say that it won't happen, but we have 27 satellites total that are surrounding the Earth right now. 24 of them are in operation 24/7, with 3 of them on standby in case they need to repair or service one of them. So the chances of that happening, you never say never, but are really highly unlikely. So check location services. If you have that turned off for any kind of security reason, that might be the reason your GPS isn't tracking where you are. The other thing, too, is you have the gyroscopes, the accelerometers and stuff, and I've seen where they give inaccurate information, and mine has to do this crazy thing where you sit there and do figure eights until it can kind of figure out. And I always think that, you know, somebody's looking at me sitting here doing this with my phone, wondering what the heck is going on, but it's the way it calibrates it. So
long night at the club.
That's right. So you might have to calibrate them as well. So when it says not functioning, it could be not functioning properly as well, and even though they don't call that out. We already mentioned swollen battery here, guys and gals out there. Swollen battery basically means it's time to it's time to get rid of that battery. That battery is 2 steps from blowing up, and with some of the, and I don't want to mention anybody here, you know, any companies out here, but we've definitely seen some problems in the past recently with some batteries that have caused some significant problems. If the battery in any way is swollen, if you see the device that is bigger than what it should be in form factor, you need to, first of all, keep it off of your body, keep it in some kind of protected case. I would not keep it in your car, and I would take it to a field technician right away. Send it back to the manufacturer, whatever you have to do. If it's a carrier and you're on CDMA, take it to the carrier. They're going to have to replace it, refix it of some sort. If it happens to be a SIM, a GSM-based phone or device, remember you could pop the SIM card out. You can always replace it. That's a field serviceable item. If it is something that you can open up and you replace the battery, go to your electronics store and get a battery replacement. That isn't something you want to wait on, because it could be a bad day at the office, and it could be something that causes some kind of bodily harm, and we certainly don't want that here at IT Pro TV. We don't want any device getting hurt, but we certainly don't want you guys and gals out there getting hurt either. Now, one of the last things we have to talk, Dan, I know we're running towards the end here, is disassembling process for proper reassembly. Maybe some of you guys remember when we disassembled the laptop that was here. You can see how we had strategically placed all the screws in different piles, and we basically, I had done other things that you guys didn't see, taken my cell phone and taking pictures of every step of the process so that you can, you know where the screw locations are, you're documenting and you're labeling the cables. And I like the pictures just for regulate, just I don't care if I've documented it properly. A picture's worth a thousand words, they say. Yeah, so I always use it as a plumb line or reference point. Organize your parts like we've mentioned. Schematics. We had one gentleman out there in the chat room that's talking about the MacBooks and said, if you're going to be taking apart a MacBook, schematics, right? So refer to the manufacturer's resources and remember to use the appropriate tools, right? As much as Dan and I would say, hey, you know what? This is a tool for every job. Not necessarily when you're working on mobile devices. Keep in mind, you have things like iFixit kits, torque screwdrivers, and stuff like that.
Blow torches.
And blow torches, right, acetylene torches, and in the end, a hammer. No, we're just kidding, guys, gals out there. Make sure that you're using the appropriate tools. There's a lot of toolkits out there. Remember electrostatic discharge as well. Work on electrically resistive mats as well so that you don't have to worry about damaging the parts that you're trying to replace.
All right, Wes, well, there's definitely a giant expanse before us when it comes to mobile devices, things that we need to know, common issues, and what they might be being caused by, and then how we can start to remedy that situation. And of course, proper procedure when we're taking things apart and putting them back together. Want to follow that because you don't want to be left with a handful of screws and parts and go, here's your device, and here's the extra bits I found inside of it. You're going to love that, right? So you're going to get some weird looks by your customers if you do that. But Wes, we thank you for walking us through this, and we thank you guys for joining us. But it looks like it is that time for us to sign off for IT Pro TV. I've been your host, Daniel Lowry.
And I'm Wes Bryan.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.